Hello and welcome to the semifinals here. Like Matt said here in Mundaline, we have Sarah Shearing on Izzet Murktide and then CJ Voege on Rhinos, and joined here by Doomwick. I'm Mason Clark. And Doom, it's all Rhinos versus Sarah. You could argue she's the hero despite playing Murktide.
Yeah, this is what we call in the business the hero deck. This is like the what Aspiring Spike 2 refers to as the hero deck. And I guess Sarah is our hero in this top 8 tournament, absolutely dominated by Rhinos, which, if many people watch my stream, I am a big fan of Rhinos, and no bias here. But yeah, we'll have to see if Sarah can take it down. And she definitely has some tools. If we maybe we can get to that in the post-sport games, but she definitely came prepared for the Rhinos this weekend.
Yeah, Sarah's someone actually that I know personally and talked to a little bit before the tournament. I knew this was one of the decks along with creativity that she really thought was going to be pretty popular outside, of course, Murktide, which is always the most popular deck. But I wanted to ask you, because you said you are such a big Rhinos fan, you play it so much. What do you think led to its dominant success this weekend? And this is a deck we've seen always perform well on not only our circuit, but just in Modern in general. But this seems like the first weekend in a little while that has been completely dominant when it comes to paper. What do you think sort of led to this perfect storm?
Tough to say. I think that there maybe has been a slight resurgence in creativity over the past couple of weeks. And traditionally speaking, at least in my experience, that has been a fairly good matchup for Rhinos. We actually saw Joseph Bernal get dispatched in the quarterfinals by a Rhinos player. So I do think that might be part of the reason. It's also just a very consistent deck. It's very good at what it does. It does the same thing basically every game. It's always going to try to put 10 power to play on turn 3 or 8 sometimes in the case of Violent Outburst, but just a very proactive deck. And also, it just has a lot of tools to deal with the aggressive decks. Like you can customize your Rhinos deck depending on how many Ragavans you expect. You can play more copies of Dead, Gone, and Fury. If you expect a lot of Murktide, you can play more Subtleties, which we saw some players do. You can even play main deck Blood Moon if you expect a lot of big mana. So just a lot of customization. And if you have the metagame read down correctly and you make your main deck choices accordingly, you can definitely have some good success. And we saw a lot of that this weekend.
That was true. Also, with players like Oliver Tamika coming back into the fold, you're going to see a lot of success with every deck he picks up and play. Not to say these other players aren't great as well, just someone who's been known to have dominance across all TCGs. Is going to be interesting to see if Tamika can take it down. He was tweeting about going to take it down about 2 weeks ago that he broke Modern, and it seems like maybe he broke Modern, and so did at least 3 other people.
Right. Yeah, and Oliver actually had some interesting card choices. I don't know if if we'll get to Oliver at some point, but he actually played main deck Mystical Dispute this weekend. So definitely a bold choice, but if you maybe expect a lot of Murktide Regent, that's a pretty good call to make.
Yep. Yeah, we see Sarah here kept 6. CJ looks to be keeping 5, is figuring out exactly that last card. Viewers at home might have saw Sarah kept Spell Snare. Might be a little surprising at first glance, but you gotta remember the cards like Fire Ice do count as 2 mana cards. And it looks like Sarah is off with turn 1 Ragavan, probably one of the best starts you can have in Modern. What is Sarah sort of looking for besides this sort of thing in order to overcome the Rhinos matchup? And who's sort of favored in your experience?
So this matchup is super close. I think that play draw matters a lot, and deck building, depending on how many copies of like Spell Pierce, Fluster Storm the Murktide player has in the main deck. One thing that I will note about Ragavan in this particular matchup, if you look at CJ's deck list or just a Rhinos deck list in general, there's not a ton of good hits. You have Shardless Agent, which might cascade into a counter spell. That's maybe a brick. I guess Brazen Borrower could be a good turn to play as a 3-1 flyer. Fury, not going to be able to cast that early. Murktide Regent, a little bit early for that one. Subtlety can't cast that. Footfalls can't cast that. Then it's a lot of reactive spells. Fire Ice, Dead Gone, Force of Negation. So Ragavan is a good card, but not nearly as impactful in this matchup as you might think in some other matchups.
All right, we see CJ here suspend a Crashing Footfalls off of Force on turn 1. And Sarah connects with the Ragavan first thing. And let's see what CJ has to offer. It's a Scalding Tarn. So like you mentioned, one of the classics aren't going to be very good with Ragavan. Sarah deploys the DSC.
And Sarah also kept the Spell Snare, respecting Brazen Borrower. There's 4 copies of those in CJ's deck, and that is a really good answer because the Petty Theft half of that card is 2 mana, and that's a really clean answer to Murktide Regent. It's going to set Sarah back a lot of resources, cards in graveyard, so definitely a heads up to keep the Spell Snare there.
100%. So you see CJ here, Shock and a Steam Vents. CJ seems to might be having a Fire Ice as he is targeting both.
But there's the Spell Snare that we talked about.
Yeah, Sarah came pre-prepared for that. She kept in the mulligan, and now CJ is like, wait, my deck doesn't play 2 mana cards. Why would you have that card?
Yeah, and then imagine a scenario where she didn't have that spell snare. There's just two creatures, just clean them all up. That's a really good situation for CJ to be in. But Sarah definitely prepared for the fire ice. She probably had, I would guess, she probably had both of those creatures in her opening hand, and that's part of the reason why she wanted the spell snare.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, she definitely had the Ragavan. I thought it was second Ragavan, but it might have been this DRC. Either way, though, she was just definitely thinking about the card, both Fire Ice and Brazen Borrower, and realized that even though the deck doesn't have any 2 mana value cards, it technically has some 2-cost spells. So we do see a Surveil here happening from the Spell Snare.
Yeah, and I talked about how Ragavan wasn't that impactful as a turn 1 play, but turn 2, CJ, the Rhinos players are actually now playing Poppies of Murktide Regent, and if you look, Sarah's got 3 cards in her graveyard. Ragavan Hate is the second treasure. That's 4 mana. She could just play a 4/4 Murktide this turn, which would not be that bad.
Yeah. Yeah, we see her hit a Fire Ice here. Let's see if she'll maybe want to fire off the fire for a little damage, a little ice for some card draw.
We're going upstairs. Come on.
Probably. She's tanking. We see Ledger Shredder as the first play for the turn.
Yeah, probably not worth using a treasure just to deal 2 damage, although you do get a connive as well with the Shredder, so it depends on the rest of her hand.
Yeah, I'm curious to see, is she drawing or firing? We won't know until we're done resolving the card here, so we do need to get our connive off. Sarah's also getting her Surveil from DRC.
Yeah, she figured maybe it's worth, the extra card is worth more than 2 damage, and it looks like, I think she did she draw a card?
She did, yeah.
Okay.
So
it looks like we just cycled the ice.
Yeah. Yeah, it might be a situation of Sarah, she did have a couple extra lands in her opening hand. I couldn't quite see her hand these turns, but maybe she just drew more lands and was like, well, I've got to find at least one counter spell. I've got to be able to beat these Rhinos. And I hear from a lot of Rhino players that Ledger Shredder is sort of an impactful card in this matchup. Can you sort of speak to that?
Yeah, it is, because part of the reason it's just hard to kill, like you see Fire Ice and Dead Gone doesn't touch it because it has 3 toughness. And the biggest reason that Shredder is so good in this matchup is the Rhinos player on turn 3 is always going to cast 2 spells with the Cascade spell and then Crashing Footfalls off of Cascade. So it's basically a lock to trigger on turn 3 every time, as we see CJ does have the Shardless Agent, and that's going to just get Sarah even deeper into her deck, try to find counter spells. 1 mana up here, so looking for either a spell. Yeah, looks like 2 spell pierce in the main deck. So see if she has one of those.
Looks like there's a conversation with the judge real quick. Maybe just double checking that this actually counts as casting could be the situation. Sarah's someone who plays a lot of Modern, but you always want to double check in these scenarios. You're on the top for the event, you're on stream. If you have a moment of even just a little bit of doubt, especially in these untimed rounds, it's just totally reasonable. Ask a judge. Always asking a judge for anything is sort of the best way to go. They're here to help you. And that's why we have these people on staff. We'll try to figure out exactly what's going on here and sort of convey it. I do assume they're just double checking that, as Modern's weird, right, Devin? There's a lot of different cards that interact in weird ways with each other.
Right. Yeah. Cascade, it's not always the clearest thing, especially when you're, casting a spell that has no mana value. Looking at Sarah's hand, it doesn't look like she currently has the spell pierce. I see it looks like a channeler, consider it a land, if I'm not mistaken. So currently does not have spell pierce, but maybe she can find a copy of pierce off of the connive trigger. So yeah, and she doesn't seem too well equipped to deal with Rhinos now. Take a look at the graveyard. It looks like we got instant land right now, so not really anywhere close to Delirium for the channel, or even a potential Unholy Heat if she were to find that. So yeah, it looks like Rhino's just going to resolve here.
Yeah, and it looks like Sarah did decide to keep the other DRC in the consider in hand, discard the Flood Strand there. So only has a 2/4 Shredder, but at least if she can turn on these DRC, she'll have somewhat of a quick clock here.
Yeah, so right now we're looking at, like hypothetically, if she draws, say, an expressive iteration, maybe can find the 4th card type for Dragon's Rage Channeler. That also is a 2nd spell for Shredder. We could potentially be looking at 6 damage, which is a pretty important number with CG being at 12. So big draw step here coming for Sarah, because I don't think her hand is really offering too much here in the way of dealing with this board presence.
Yep. Yeah, she's gonna need a card like maybe expressive iteration if she really wants to find Delirium right away. And the Rhinos deck doesn't give you much time, right? Once you actually get going.
No, not at all. We're looking at 10 power here. Now, she does have a decent number of blockers for the Shardless Agent, but even 8 power of Trample. Sarah's only at 13. She can't really afford to, realistically, besides some chump blocks, she probably doesn't have more than 2 combat steps left.
Yeah. You see her taking. She
There's
drew
the
expressive
expressive.
iteration.
That's pretty
Wow.
good.
Yeah, we got a surveil happening here. Sarah knows that she has got to get her beat down on as she is thinking about some card. We'll see what it is when it's put in the graveyard. It's a
That's
consider
an
there.
instant.
Yeah. We've
See
got
if
the
we can
sorcery
find a
guidance. We
bauble,
got
maybe.
well, we've hit DRC, I think Ragavan, and a Misty Rainforest as our 3 cards. So,
well, actually, there's no creature in the graveyard. So what you can do is you can play the Channeler from exile, discard the Channeler from hand. That's the 4th creature type, and it's a spell for Shredder. That's 6 damage. There you go.
yeah, and that actually sets up lethal 2 on the next turn, right? Because
Yep.
that would be 6 in the air now, 6 in the air next turn with an extra 3/3 just in case something like Fury actually did come down. So Sarah might be in a prime position here as long as CJ doesn't have anything like Brazen Borrowers, or a bunch of Brazen Borrowers, I should say, to get in the way.
Yeah, and that's the thing too. Yeah, Brazen Borrower might not quite be good enough because now there's 3 flyers. I guess you could bounce the Shredder and then cast the Borrower. No, you only have 3 mana, so you can't even do that. Yeah, CJ's really. I'm not really sure what CJ could draw here at this point. At 6 life against 3 power flyers, 1 blocker's not good enough. I guess maybe like basic land, ice plus Borrower or something like that, or maybe you like bounce the Shredder, tap the Channeler, take 3.
Yeah, that seems to be the only way you can actually survive here. CJ could have had red card Fury plus one of those cards before, but played the Otawara for turns, only has 2 cards in hand. That's going to be important. And Sarah's now deciding, okay, these Rhinos are attacking me for 8. Do I want to get any chump block action going on? Can I lose to, like, some sort of violent outburst trick? She does the math and decides, not worth it, not going to happen to me. Down to 5 she goes.
Yeah, CJ
7,
can
my bad.
really only threatening at like 2 extra points of damage. You can either maybe cast Outburst for +2, you can maybe Fire Ice for +2, but even if there's only 1 red source, so CJ wouldn't even be able to double Fire Ice here. Yeah, I think the only way that CJ can survive is very likely just some combination of like 2 cards in hand. They have to be either some combination of Fire Ice and Borrower. Both of those have to be those cards.
Yeah. We see Staring here, fetching end of turn. Looks like Sarah's maybe going to cast a Consider. If she wanted to play around those cards, whatever, and maybe try and trick CJ into letting her untap win and fetch there. So, yep, she's going to cast a Consider, bin the Spiral of Canal off the Surveil. Now going to resolve Consider proper.
Yeah, that expressive iteration last turn was such a massive draw step, and that's basically my experience when I play against Murktide. They need to break a draw step, and they're like, oh, expressive iteration, here it is.
Yeah, that's a good one for not bricking ever again as well.
Yeah.
Sort of get the chain going. Speaking of which, expressive iteration, double Surveil happened.
Just found another one. All right.
Yeah, and Sarah here, gets a lot of looks over the top of her deck. Finds the top card, says, that's good enough for me. One of the cards was definitely expressive. The other is Bolt. Puts Bolt in exile. That's going to make, even Brazen Borrower not good enough. The life totals here are wrong for CJ. We did not update those. CJ was at 6. It might have been maybe our life totals were swapped there.
Maybe.
Sarah was at 6. Maybe we'll try and figure that out. But either way, CJ is taken down in game number 1, going to Sarah there. Big win to always get that first one in the modern game. Let's see if we can pull up the sideboards, though, here in a second and talk about sort of what's going on and sort of what these players might be expecting here. And we'll give you any updates on our backup matches if they come to it. CJ here is our first Rhinos player that we're going to be talking about today. We have 2 other Rhino matchups on the other side of the bracket, so we'll get used to this. But the sideboard here is 4 Endurance, 4 Force of Vigor, 3 Mystical Dispute, 3 Blood Moon, and an Emrakul, the Aeons Torn. Doom, you're the Rhino man.
Give me the endurances. Sorry, give me the endurances and give me the mystical disputes. Those are the ones that we definitely want to bring in here. Typically, I'm a big fan of shaving on Force of Negation in this matchup. I think that you can somewhat especially post board, you can try to effectively trade 1-for-1 a little bit with them. So you don't want to 2-for-1 yourself with Force of Negation. So those would probably be my cuts. Maybe a couple copies of Subtlety. Maybe you can trim a Fire Ice. No, you're on the play. But yeah, we definitely want the copies of endurances and disputes here.
Awesome. That makes sense to me. Let's see if we can pull up Sarah's sideboard here. One of the cool things with the Rhinos deck is your sideboard's always sort of the same similar number of cards. You got a bunch of them. Deck building restrictions are hard and makes sideboarding a little bit easier once you get it down. For Sarah, though, her sideboard has 3 engineered explosives. Can you tell she wanted to beat y'all? 2 Blood Moon, 2 Subtlety, 2 Unlicensed Hers, a Fluster, a Spell Pierce, a Fury, a Season Pyro, an Abrade, and a Dress Down. Doom, what do you think about this sideboard? What would you bring in?
So give me definitely all those engineered explosives. Those are amazing in this matchup. Definitely Sarah's best card. From there, you probably want to bring in the Flusterstorm and the Spell Pierce. Those are good at fighting over the Cascade spell on the stack. And then potentially the Fury, because these games sometimes can get a little grindy where you're both trading a lot of resources. Like, Sarah trades a counterspell for your Crashing Footfalls, and then maybe you trade a removal spell for a Regavan, and you're kind of just going back and forth and jockeying for position. And Fury is just kind of like, hey, this is 6 power, deal with it. And it's nice that Fury also dodges Fire Ice. So give me probably want to have access to that. From there, probably nothing else. Probably want to trim on a couple copies of Bolts because those don't really kill 4/4s that well. Dress Down also probably not something that Sarah wants, but that appears to be where Sarah wants to be.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. Talk to her a little bit about her sideboarding plans, and it's very similar to what you said there. So curious to see sort of, if she adapts, whatever. Obviously, every Rhinos deck we have today in our top 4 is a little bit different from each other, but ultimately, big picture-wise, it is still the same matchup. We're going into game number 2 here, Doom. Who you still think is sort of favored? Does winning game 1 matter so much in this matchup, like you might see in some more polarizing matchups in Modern, like an Affinity deck? Or is this one where, it's business as usual? Sometimes you lose game 1 to the Murktide player. You're still feeling good if you're CJ here on Rhinos.
Well, Sarah wasn't the play that game, and if you think about it, Sarah really won that race by that one turn, so the play draw really, really matters. So with CJ on the play for game 2 and getting access to disputes and endurances, I think CJ might gain. Like CJ is probably going to bring in more cards than Sarah will, but Sarah's are probably a little bit more impactful with 3 copies of explosives, so it's a little close. Without 3, like I think Murktide usually plays about 2 copies of explosives, so normally I would say that I'd probably take CJ, but with having 3 copies and up to 3 pierces and I think 3 pierce and a fluster postboard as well, I think I might have to go with Sarah in the postboard games.
This Sarah is looking sort of a favorite. And, if you're Sarah, this top 4 is what you were looking for, right? Like we said before, she thought Rhinos and Murktide and Creativity were the 3 biggest decks. Murktide, just because it's so popular in Modern, really gunned for those other 2 decks. You can see it in her, the way she built her sideboard. And if you reach top 4 of this tournament, this big 10K, and it's like, wow, these are all the matchups I wanted to play. Let's get it going. And Sarah's someone who's sort of committing to our grind this year on the NRG series. She really wants to make the Players Championship. She wants to make the Pro Tour. She wants to compete at Magic at the highest level, and so far set up for a prime position to do it here.
Yeah, for sure. And she definitely came with the right deck. Murktide is one of, if not the most popular deck in Modern right now, probably one of the best decks, definitely. And she definitely came with a good list here, came prepared for all those Rhinos, and she's been showing her chops all weekend.
Yeah, did the session with her on Thursday, and she said she was 19-1 in leagues, and so it was just felt really good, ready to go, and sort of follow that record here. That makes, I think, Sarah like 26-2 or whatever. She's sort of just killing it here with the Murktide deck. It's better than that. We had 9 rounds yesterday, so it's probably like 28-2.
That's a lot of wins and not a lot of losses.
Yeah. That's high level analysis. Get this man a raise right there. We got him in. Devin.
The other thing I was going to say, I think I can make a prediction here. I think we might have a Rhinos player in the other bracket in the finals.
That is true. We might have 50% of Rhinos into the finals. I've been known to make some joke about the Rhinos deck, but it is looking really good right now. I think, it sort of is the perfect storm, like you mentioned earlier, of like all these sort of great matchups here. So we're going to have to see exactly what's going on, as our screen just changed really weird for me. I don't know what's going on, but okay. Fix that anyways. So I'm curious to see sort of what's going to happen here with the rest of our tournament. If we get any updates on our backup match, we will let you know. Otherwise, we will jump into it if Oliver is still playing when that time comes. But for now, we are going to follow Sarah. Listen, you're going to get some Rhinos on screen no matter what we do. We just didn't want to subject you to the Rhinos mirror again. We had it earlier in the tournament. It was fine, but we figured we'd make y'all wait because you might just have to experience it in the finals.
Yeah, Rhinos mirror gets a little weird sometimes. Let's just say that.
Yeah. Yeah, no one's. I don't think any of our players are playing Becomements this weekend either. I think that tech's sort of fallen off. So it doesn't even get weirder with like, okay, they're attacking. Can I beat the card Becomements and spend that extra minute thinking about that? Especially in these untimed rounds. As Sarah seems to have a hand that's incredibly blue, but I think the reason this hand looks so tempting, Devin, is there's only one land.
Yeah, looks like I think Murktide, Shredder, Counterspell, Spell Pierce. Is that double Spell Pierce? Maybe double.
I think
Spell
it's
Pierce.
double spell. Yeah, I think there's one in the front and one in the back with an island as the land.
Now, I think Sarah might be on 6, and I think CJ is going to 5. I think CJ is going to at least 5, potentially 4, but it looks like 5.
Yeah, I think CJ's
but yeah.
on 5. The backup match is still in game 1, so we're probably going to get y'all some extra magic action this round. So be excited for that. No promises there, but that random mirror can't go sort of long here. Devin, sorry to interrupt you there. We got the word from the booth, and looks like Sarah kept.
I kind of like it. It's pretty hard to mulligan a hand with double Spell Pierce against Crashing Footfalls when you're on the draw, because that's one of your best cards in the early turns. Like, yes, Engineered Explosives is very good, but it is maybe, something that you want on turn 3 or turn 4, and having double Spell Pierce here, I think is too good to pass up, even with the one lander. I think there may have also been a consider 2, if I am not mistaken.
Oh, is a 2-lander. Oh, the Misty was
behind
the. Okay, so what happened is I think she had the Misty pulled up behind this Ledger Shard. I couldn't see it. Gotcha. Okay, this hand is a lot safer of a keep now. Suddenly, I'm gonna say, it's really tempting when you're putting up most of 5 to keep your hand that needs a little bit of help too, right? They're gonna have some extra time. Things are gonna fall apart as we do see CJ fetch up a breeding pool here. Probably gonna suspend Crashing Footfalls as his only option if you're gonna shock it. That's what happens.
And this is kind of something that I think a lot of people assume about the Rhinos deck, is that Crashing Footfalls is a quote-unquote dead card in your opening hand. And I actually think that this is your best plan against Murktide, because they have a lot of soft counter magic post-board, Flusterstorm and Spell Pierce. As you can see, Sarah has 4 copies of those combined post-board. And one of the best things against Spell Pierce and Flusterstorm is suspend Rhinos and cast it on turn 4 when you have all of your men untapped.
Yeah, I love the player cans. I don't know if you saw CJ behind the mask. For sure, just drew that Stampede, just had that face on, which maybe would end up working out for CJ here, as you talked about with Sarah, having a lot of light permission, maybe can't answer these as well. But it looks like CJ has, at least somewhat of a plan going on here. I'm going to get some Rhinos here in just a couple turns.
Yeah, it's kind of funny. CJ, kind of shrugged a little bit, thought that was a bad draw. But I think if he could see Sarah's hand, he would probably, do a fist pump there.
Yeah. Yeah, especially if CJ has the 3rd land rolled up too. It's just like, what are you gonna do? You're gonna get Rhinos eventually. Might as well just have the guaranteed thing. And also, the one thing, sort of stagger your Rhinos against E, right?
Yep, exactly. I was going to mention that.
Oh, nice.
And yeah, exactly. So 4 and 3 is not ideal. Like if CJ, potentially he would rather have 4 and 2, because that means that you have 2 turns of the first set of Rhinos before the second one comes in. Whereas now you're in a situation where Sarah could take 8 from the first hit and then let the second one resolve and then clean up all 4. So maybe there's a bit of argument to maybe not suspend the second one there. But yeah, and the other thing about the suspending is typically it can be bad if the Murktide player has a lot of pressure. But if you look at Sarah's hand, it's just it's all reactive, all mono counterspell. So that is definitely where CJ wants to be here.
Yeah, we just had a sleeve split there. Long tournament, sometimes sleeves break. But yeah, like you said, you do sort of want to stagger these things against EE here. Little things like that make or break tournaments too.
Right. Yeah, and with the knowledge of, 3 copies of explosives, if Sarah does find a copy of that, she's going to be in a spot where she can pretty easily just take the first hit and then clean up all 4 after taking the 8 damage.
Yeah. We know Sarah has at least Ledger Shredder in hand, so there's a play if she wants it, but maybe just something like a counterspell might want to consider holding up for the Cascade turn. CJ is only on 2 cards in hand that do that mold of 5.
Right, and this is kind of where you have to consider the staggering as well. So you have a Rhinos on 4 and 3. Now, if CJ casts Shardless Agent this turn, like let's say Sarah taps out for Shredder, and CJ, worst case scenario for Sarah, goes land, Shardless Agent. There's 2 Rhinos in play. You cannot afford to wait on the explosives until the next Rhinos. Okay, as I was talking, there's the 3rd one.
I know why CJ grimaced now, Devin. He had the other Rhino in hand, I think.
Well, does this qualify as staggering? Is this enough staggering for you?
This qualifies for staggering for me. You're the Rhino person. I'm not going to sort of speak on your behalf, but I feel pretty good about the way we can play around engineered explosives right now, personally.
Oh, now we're fine. Yeah.
Yeah. Now, is this a stampede of rhinos? Is this a crash of them?
So I think the crash is the second one. The third one's the stampede, but I have nothing for you on what the fourth one is. We're going to need Twitch chats up on that one.
It's called the Stone Cold, I believe.
If he draws the fourth Rhino now, I don't even know. I don't know anymore. We're gonna have I'm gonna have a nice Twitter screenshot of a Rhino, just like perfect harmony, a 4, 3, a 2, and a 1. Like you cannot draw it up any better.
Yeah, and like we talked about before, Sarah has all these spell pierces which don't do anything at CJ because CJ has only drawn lands and crashing footfalls this whole game.
Right. Yeah. Now I think Sarah did pick up a second copy of Counterspell. So she's definitely going to be, in the clear on the first 2 copies of Rhino. And you see no attack there, respecting the endurances, which she knows are definitely going to come in post-board. So I like that.
Yep. Heads up play there. Doesn't want to have to use a counterspell on that. She has counterspell, consider, spell pierce, and I believe an Unholy Heat in hand for Sarah here. Thank you so much, Sarah, for holding your hand above the table. We love that here on coverage.
Mason, what do you think of this? Elliot said the fourth one is a Rhinado. Do we like that?
A Rhinado. That's really good. That's really good.
It's a pretty good one.
We are going to see Counterspell here. Let's see. And Mystical Dispute for CJ here. That's going to trigger Connive for Sarah. She draws an Unholy Heat.
And still able to play around these spell pierces. If I was Sarah, I'd be getting rid of these spell pierces. These are almost dead at this point.
Yeah, it really is a moment of, if your spell pierce isn't good this turn, this is the last turn really where if CJ draws and plays a Cascader, you can spell pierce. But besides that, you're probably never getting anything. And she agrees, discarding the spell pierce, going up to a 2/4. How much can the sizing matter? Can these Ledger Shredders hold off enough of the Rhinos, you think, for E to clean us up? Or is this Stampede just going to get us?
So with Sarah at 19, CJ can't attack this turn. A best case scenario for Sarah, she puts a counter on the Shredder, which it looks like she's going to, because this is the second spell. We've cast a counter spell into consider. We can make the Shredder a 3/5. And then 3/5 to maybe block, to basically make it so CJ can't really attack next turn, because you go attack 4 Rhinos, block with 1, Sarah cast 2 spells, eat a Rhino. That's kind of bad for CJ. So CJ might be in a spot where he wants to wait a turn to attack with 4 Rhinos, get 1 swallowed up, take 12. So if basically that might buy Sarah 1 additional turn to potentially find that explosives.
Yeah, and we know Sarah here has another Ledger Shredder in hand if she wants it. Looks like she is going to cast Shredder using Spiral Canal and the Island, playing E on 0, get the double Connive. Hello.
There it is. That's the explosives. Now, as we talked about with the staggering, so this is going to be a spot where Sarah's going to put the third counter on the first Shredder almost indefinitely to make a 4/6 to be able to kind of blank CJ's attack this turn. And honestly, she can probably wait until the third one suspended at this point, because you could even maybe, if you play 2 spells next turn, you could make a 3/5, which could block 2 Rhinos, take 8, go to 11, and then you get the other 5 or whatever.
Yeah, I think you can wait. Also, you can maybe start attacking. Yeah, because right here, this is an attack for 4, down to 11 for CJ. If CJ's for sure casting a spell off the Rhino, being, this Crashing Footfalls coming off suspend, if CJ casts another one to catch up, Sarah does have that counterspell lined up, doesn't have to use the EE this turn, and then get these big Ledger Shredders. Might actually be setting up for a lethal over the next 2 turns, as we do see the EE is just going to pop. We're not going to take any risks on maybe something happening.
Yeah, with the attack definitely signified the explosive popping there, because I think if you want to hold, if you could, basically she could either hold back the Shredder and decide not to pop the explosives and wait a turn, or attack with the Shredder and then make sure that no shenanigans afoot with the just kind of popping the explosives that turn, which I don't hate that.
Yeah, I was going to say, I thought she would just go to 11 as well and just pop the E on the next Rhinos, but might just have those Rhinos invalidated with the Shredder and not worrying about it long term.
Yeah, she's got a 4/6 and a 3/5 now, and she's also not under pressure because she gets to just kind of attack here. She can't take any damage next turn because the Rhinos they're coming off next turn, so they don't have haste. So she kind of gets like a nice clean attack here. I guess the Endurance can block the 3/5, but you're probably okay with that because I think Sarah has a heat too. So if the 3/5 gets blocked, you just heat the Endurance. CJ takes 4, goes to 7, and then you just have lethal play anyways.
Yeah, I was gonna say Sarah discarded a connive to a heat to a connive last turn with the Endurance on the stack there, but maybe has drawn another one as we do see a DRC to passing. I think if she had one, we would spin it there for the connive trigger. As here comes the Crashing Footfalls, and Sarah's gonna cast Counterspell, get the Surveil off her DRC, put the Bobble in the graveyard's looking pretty good if you're a Sarah Shearing fan.
Yeah, I think we're just about done here. Don't really think that CJ has any. I mean, even if you have a bounce spell for the big shredder, you're still kind of in a rough spot here.
Yeah, I mean, the thing to think about too is, even if we stabilize, we only have 1 Rhinos left in our deck, or 1 Crashing Footfalls left. Might be enough to go the distance. You have to Endurance yourself to sort of get back these Rhinos and get going again.
Right, exactly. I guess the Endurance can jump in front of the big shredder, and maybe you can take 6. Well, if Sarah plays 2 spells, triggers connive, and somehow gets to Delirium, that could be a lethal attack. We'll have to see what Sarah has in her hand left over.
Yeah, she's moving straight to combat here. We're going to see a block over here. Currently, just 5 damage. Sarah doesn't have any bolts in her board in her deck unless she's changed her plan. And yeah, just looking at Counterspell, I think Subtlety is the other card. So Sarah's down just to be like, whatever. Even if you have Mystical Dispute here, even if you have Flusterstorm, whatever, it doesn't matter. I've got this Counterspell. I've got lethal multiple ways. I've got this Subtlety as just a blocker, an attacker too. So,
oh yeah,
what is Subtlety if not a bolt?
4 mana, bolt you. All right, we'll cast Counterspell, and that should be the end of the game. Or yeah, Subtlety, yeah, that works too.
Yeah, and congratulations to Sarah, moving on to the finals, defeating CJ here. Oh my goodness. Well, that we don't have an all Rhinos finals for you, but Sarah, moving on to the finals, you can tell she's excited. Like we mentioned before, she wants to grind the circuit this year. She wants to make it to the player championship. And the cool new way our system works is if you win one of our showdowns, aka our Saturday events, you immediately make it to our player championship. You get the token, and that player's championship is $25,000 in prizing. It's a PTQ as well, and it gives you one of these cool jackets. And it's just something that you don't get to do very much, right? These invitational sort of elite tournaments where there's only 16 players, everybody in the field. They're very rare and hard to come by, and it's such an experience to get to play in one.
Oh yeah, and I got to watch coverage of the last championship this year for 2022. It was an absolute blast. It looked like so much fun, and definitely something that all these players are playing towards. And congratulations on Sarah. Congratulations to Sarah. Excuse me.
Yeah, well, let's go in and let's see what's happening. So looks like we are still in game number 1. So I imagine we're going to see a lot of Rhinos on the board, or no Rhinos. There's only 2 really modes that's still happening. We're going to be down there in just 1 second. But yes, congratulations, Sarah. Cannot wait to see her play the finals and see if she can crush this here. But let's see who her opponent is, because Oliver Tomiko and Steven Dykman, both names that if you've been playing Magic for a long time, these names. Both these players are stone cold killers. Oliver Tomiko actually won the Star City Games Player Championship, very similar to our own, back in 2020. Is also a Yu-Gi-Oh! World Champion, and I believe has won a multitude of SCGs, top 8 Grand Prix, and all that. Steven Dykman, no stranger either to success in Magic, has Grand Prix top 8s, good Pro Tour finishes, an incredibly strong player.
Right, and it looks like the situation that you described, we were either going to be a lot of Rhinos or no Rhinos. Well, there were a lot of Rhinos, but now only Steven has a lot of Rhinos. So I believe this is still game 1, which is kind of crazy that we finished an entire Murktide versus Rhinos match, and this is still on game 1. But these games can get pretty grindy. If you think both players have turn 3 Rhinos, you're going to attack, the other player's going to block, you play another Rhinos, the other player plays another Rhinos, and you're kind of just trading up the curve. And sometimes the games can come down to, there's basically 2 stages. Either the player with that can navigate Force of Negation a little bit better. If you draw Force of Negation, you can force the Rhinos or something like that. Or if you both trade a bunch of Rhinos, the player who draws more Furies or is able to cast more Furies. Now, Murktide also does add a bit of a layer to that as well.
Yeah, Murktide's sort of a newer re-addition to these Murktide decks. When MH2 first came out, this was when we saw some players, I think like yourself, experiment with, and it sort of went away. What sort of got players back on this card?
Tough to say. I think it might be because maybe you just want to compete with like you're trying to match the other Murktide region, like you're trying to match the Izzet Murktide deck. The only thing is your Murktides aren't necessarily going to be as like they're not always going to be consistently large like 7/7/8/8s like the Izzet Murktide deck is, because they have stuff like Consider and Dragon's Rage Channeler to kind of fuel the graveyard. So yours might not be as large, but the nice thing that it also kind of does, if you have, say, like a Crashing Footfalls, you can maybe kind of make a big Murktide Regent as like a card that can maybe block an Archon of Cruelty. Like you can sack a Rhino and then have a blocker for it. I'm not sure, but yeah, just a good card if you in the kind of the grindy matchups if the games go long.
Yeah, and by the way, speaking of the games going along and grinding here, Steven Dykman's playing Fable the Mirror Breaker and his Murktide deck, and sorry, his Rhinos deck, and only playing one Murktide. We'll talk about that in a second here, as we did just see some Rhinos attack Murktide block. We get a Fury on there, and now Dykman, while only at 4 life, is sort of representing Fury plus Fable the Mirror Breaker. Fable's sort of a newer addition to these decks. Norm, I'm saying Devin, my bad, still Norm in the background there. I got it's good to see you there, Norm. What do you think about this edition, adding Fable the Mirror Breaker to the deck and the end game it can present?
you can see me maybe looking at the screen. I was trying to figure out what that kind of darker card is. That's a Fable, right? That's
Fable. Yeah,
okay,
we have a smoke inner sleeve. Yeah, for
okay.
Dykman here.
Gotcha. I actually think Fable's pretty good, especially like you said, in combination with Fury. The nice thing about Fable too is you have, if we take a look at Steven's deck list, I mean, just in most Rhinos deck list, you have cards that might not necessarily, or like are pretty time sensitive. Like Ice is very good on turn 2, might not be as good later in the game. Dead Gone, there might be, for lack of a better term, it might be dead in some matchups. And you have these kinds of cards that can turn into actual, or potentially turn into actual cards with the first or the second chapter. The 2/2 is pretty good. It accelerates you to a hardcast Fury, so you can go turn 3 Fable, turn 4 attack with Shaman Token, hardcast Fury, and then the backside's obviously crazy with if you get to ever copy a Fury, or even sometimes copy a 4/4 trample is good enough too.
We're going to see a draw here. And Dykman's got a lot of interesting choices. He could immediately try and target the Fury, and then interaction might happen. He maybe can just move to attacks. He's really close to having lethal just there. If you're Dykman and you're sort of in this position, Devin, how do you go about solving this complicated board state? Because there's a lot going on despite there not being a lot of cards.
So with Oliver having 1 card in hand at 8 life, if you expect Oliver to have, say, maybe a copy of Brazen Borrower, I think what I might do is just, like, you technically have, we're going to copy Borrower. I actually don't hate that, because you can go copy Borrower if Oliver interacts with the Borrower. Like, let's say Oliver's last card is Dead Gone. If Oliver Dead Gone's the Borrower, you still have a lethal attack, because you go Chump Block Fury, take 8. So I think this is good. The other thing I was going to say is maybe you just, this is probably better than copying the Fury, because that line just loses to a bounce spell. So I like this.
Yeah, I think this line beats most things that aren't even actually Fire Ice doesn't work either. Yeah, because there's on a second 1 toughness thing. So Oliver with it looks to be only 1 card in our hand from our perspective. There might be another one where it's mistaken, but
yeah, with Dykman at 1, the Fire Ice probably would have been fired off by now too.
Yeah. Also, it looks like we're tapping the Borrower. That's probably the Borrower that is a token copy. Oh, sorry. Okay. I thought they were representing it to make it easier for each other to understand, but looks like it was a dexterity error. Because Oliver is going to get to move to blocks.
Oh, I thought there was 2 Rhinos. That's actually a Goblin Shaman token, but it's like
that's
the chump block there, and that's 9. Okay, that makes things a lot different. Yeah. But anyways, Oliver winning game 1.
Well, Oliver gets taken down there in game number 1 against Steven Dykman. Looked like a crazy one. I'm glad we got to see the last little bit there and see, how a card like Fable the Mirror Breaker can sort of change the dynamic of that matchup a little bit. And sort of, like you mentioned, maybe it was the edge Dykman needed to take over there. We didn't get to see the whole match, but it seemed to be pretty good there near the end.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we looked like Fable had provided quite a bit of value. Like we saw there, it was able to copy a Brazen Borrower, even the threat of it just being able to copy a Fury. We kind of talked about this a little bit before we went live. We tried to see if we could figure out whose list had the best edge in the mirror match, because there were so many Rhinos players. And I actually did think that Steven had the best edge in the mirror, because if we look at the deck list, there's 4 copies of Fury, and the Fables I actually think are quite good in the mirror match.
Yeah, I can totally see that. Well, let's pull up one of these Rhino sideboard here to see what they're talking about. Both players have very similar sideboards. Oliver Tomiko is going to be our first one. Oliver here has 4 Endurance, 4 Force of Vigor, 3 Blood Moon. There's extra 2 Furies, a Gemstone Caverns, and a Mystical Dispute. Has 3 more Mystical Disputes in the main deck, though, if you're curious why there's only 1 on the board. Devin, what would you bring in here?
So Oliver's game 1 setup is probably not that great for the mirror. I think that Murktide Regent, while decent, there are some Brazen Borrowers and Fire Aces Dead Gons. And I don't think Dispute is really where you want to be either. So I definitely want the Furies, and then since Oliver's in the play, he's not going to want the Gemstone Caverns, but definitely the Furies. I'm not really sure how many copies of Dispute that Oliver wants, because especially with Steven having less Murktide Regents and more Fables and Furies, the Disputes aren't going to be quite as good. Now, they are still decent at fighting over Force of Negation specifically. Like, there's that big turn where you Violent Outburst in your opponent's turn. Maybe they hardcast Force. Maybe you have a mana up to Dispute. So that could be something, but definitely the Furies. And I would likely at least trim or, some copies of those Mystical Disputes.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense to me. Let's look at what Dykeman's doing here. Since this is the mirror match, they're going to be playing a lot of similar cards, but there are some differences, like I mentioned before, the Fable, the Mirror Breaker, and stuff like that in the main deck change. And then Dykeman's sideboard is much more condensed with 4 Endurance, 4 Force of Vigor, 4 Mystical Dispute, 3 Blood Moon. If you're Dykeman, what do you want in this matchup?
It's kind of funny because I think Dykeman's almost pre-boarded. Like, we have the 4 copies of Fury. We have the 3 Fable, the Mirror Breakers, which I think are quite good. One thing I didn't mention from Oliver's side, both players have Endurance. That's a card that sometimes can come into the matchup, mostly because if the games go long, if you're both trading a bunch of Rhinos with each other, then you can imagine if you've gone through all 4 Footfalls, Endurancing yourself is actually a pretty good line. So that is something that may or may not come up. Trying to think. Dykeman probably wants to shave. I don't really know. You might maybe like shave a Dead Gun, shave a couple Fire Ices to bring in maybe a couple of Endurances. But yeah, I think Dykeman's almost pre-boarded for the mirror here.
Now, does the fact that Tomiko has a card like 3 Murktide in his main deck, does that change the equation any on Endurance? You mentioned it being decided close, or is that just a thing where it's not worth fighting since these are such long, drawn-out matches?
The thing about that's like, if you're trying to fight over an early Murktide, the awkward part is you're going to be down a card because, unless you have turn 3 Endurance, you can just kind of fire it off. But you don't want to put yourself down a card that early. The one thing that Dykeman might want more access to is Mystical Dispute. Like, I think Dykeman's disputes are better than Tomiko's because Tomiko has so many Murktide regions.
Makes sense to me, as we do see Oliver Tomiko mulling down to 6 here. Dykeman taking on his hand. Looks like it's probably going to be a keep here from his demeanor. He's got at least 2 lands, so let's see what's going on here.
And we got Oliver on the play this game. We'll see if maybe Steven has see if we see any luck counters in the feature match area.
Does Dykeman have any? He does have 2 main deck Gemstone Caverns. So yeah, Dykeman, could be getting a little lucky today.
I feel like we haven't seen a luck counter. I don't know. I don't remember seeing one yesterday. I watched a decent amount of coverage yesterday. I don't remember seeing one. But yeah, see if we're as the saying goes, you got to get lucky to win a Magic tournament, and the card literally says luck counter on it.
Yeah. No one wins a Magic tournament without beating a bad matchup or having a good sort of draw step. Except for maybe Seth Manfield, who famously won a limited GP. Got in the car with Siggy and them, was driving home and goes, I don't think I mulliganed all day. So besides that one example, that is the exception that proves the rule. You're going to have to get a little lucky to win the thing. And, with luck counter, no better way to do it.
Right. Oliver is going pretty deep here. I think he's on 5.
I believe so. We definitely saw, this is our second redraw since we've been here. We maybe missed a little bit during sideboarding. Unsure it happened there. Typically, we try to throw it down so just players present decks and start mulliganing. But sometimes we do miss it in the case of, showing you all those beautiful, beautiful deck lists over the people at MTG Melee. Love their program and their support. Thanks, Brad.
Like putting back at least 2 cards here. Can't tell if it's 2 or 3.
Yeah, there's definitely 2. I wonder, sometimes, players will put 2 and then figure out the 4th. It's like, all right, these are the easy choices. And it looks like it is just going to be 2 here for Oliver. So Oliver on to 5 cards. No luck counter for Dykeman here. So Oliver plays a Scalding Tarn and passes the turn back.
Yeah, and now the early turns are really, there's not a ton of action because the Rhinos deck is really all about getting started on turn 3, especially in a matchup where there's no opposing 1-drop. You're not going to see a Dead Gone, but Steven does have a turn 1 Suspend Footfalls. Actually, this is probably one of the other matchups where Suspending Footfalls is actually not too bad, specifically because if you expect to those situations where you're both kind of trading with Rhinos, the one turn where you get to go, like, let's say, you both trade with the turn 3 Rhinos, and then there's one turn where Steven gets to go resolve my suspend spell, cast another Rhinos. You now all of a sudden have 4. If Oliver can only produce 2, then that means you're guaranteed to get in for a big hit that one turn. So suspend Footfalls actually not that bad in this matchup.
That makes a ton of sense to me. We do see this many here off basic forest. Oliver took a draw set for turn. Did not fetch a Scalding Tarn. Probably a sign that Oliver is trying to draw some more lands.
Yeah, potentially maybe worried about an ice from Steven. Like if Oliver doesn't have, that's one of those things where if you don't have your own copy of ice and you want to try and play around your opponents and you just lead on 2 fetches so you can't get iced, because if they ice you, you just respond and crack the fetch. But with the second land being an island and we're shocking here, I'd be surprised if there wasn't an ice from Oliver's side.
It does seem like to be the case that Oliver is going to be icing the upkeep. Ice, baby. Violent Outburst seems to be the draw from Dykeman here.
And we get a Misty. And one of the other things, well, it's a little bit easier when you're on the play with Violent Outburst. Timing your cascade spell, specifically with Outburst. Like in the case of for Oliver, if Oliver has Violent Outburst and third land, you're going to want to do that on Steven's upkeep, because upkeep means Steven cannot pitch cast Force of Negation, also only has 2 lands, so can't hard cast Mystical Dispute. Obviously, if it's Shardless Agent, you just jam it. If you get forced, you get forced. But even in those situations, if you're trading 2 for 1, and the Rhinos matchup can get pretty grindy, so you're not even that upset with that exchange.
Yeah. Twitch chat talking about Oliver's sleeve colors. They think it's olive color, which makes sense. He is Oliver. As we just see Shardless Agent come down here and immediately flip the Rhinos. That's how we do it. Save us some time. Let's go.
Always hate when you have to it's 30 cards deep or whatever, and you're just like 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. It also sucks if you feel obliged to look. I told the coverage story yesterday. I played against Living and they cascaded on 3 and hit 7 cascaders in the cascade. And I was like, wow, I'm so glad I actually looked.
Yeah, you don't have to worry about those for a little while.
Yeah. That game was one of the easier games against Living I've ever played. That was a nice one.
Yeah.
Anyways, yes, we do see the fetching of the Ketria Triome.
All right, so no Force of Negation from Steven. So I would be hard-pressed to say that Steven is not going to cast the Cascade spell. But given that Steven didn't have Force, I think Oliver has 1 or 2 cards. I thought it was 2. If it's 2, we can have Force blue card. If not, then we're going to be trading some Rhinos. But I would have to imagine that Steven probably has a Cascade spell here.
Yeah, Steven also has access to Fable the Mirror Breaker. Is this a card where you want to play it a little early because of the rummaging effect, you want to find the right things, or is that sort of your refill card if the game goes later?
In this particular board state, because we're facing down so much power, definitely would not, if I had the choice between Fable and Shardless, I would just jam. You kind of have to jam the Shardless here. You can't afford to take that much damage. But in the instance where maybe Steven had a Force of Negation and then had the option to play Fable plus Cascade spell, it's still probably better to play the Cascade spell. You kind of just want to jam us. You kind of want to. This is more of an aggressive matchup. You want to try to take the initiative here. No pun intended.
Makes sense. Also, it sort of shows what the way these players are playing, right? Like they're fetching a bunch of basics here. They know how much every single point of life matters, even if it might make casting, their turn 5 spells a little bit harder.
Right. We got 3 mana lined up. Looks like we do have a Cascade spell.
Violent Outburst gets some rise. I gotta say, Oliver does have Steven beat on the basic. Oh, on top of that. Okay.
Last 2 cards. Force blue card.
Oh, Force blue card 2 for Oliver. Wow. All right. Oliver has got the initiative there. I was gonna say Oliver's winning the basic land game. Just has the better version of Dykeman's, but he's also winning the game.
Yeah, now. Also winning the game now.
Yeah, and Oliver went to 5 cards. Dykeman kept 7, and Oliver's about to chunk in for 10. Looks like Dykeman might have a Fury though, as he does seem to be evoking Fury, discarding Fable the Mirror Breaker, taking down one of those Rhinos. That's going to be a huge help in this matchup.
It is a huge help, but we're not really where you want to be. We're going to take 7. It's still a 3-turn clock. Ideally, Dykeman would want to maybe hold the Fury so you can hard cast it and maybe trade with effectively 2 Rhinos. You deal 4 to 1 and then trade with the other one. But it's possible that maybe Steven. I wonder if that signifies that Steven doesn't have any more lands left over, because or maybe you're planning on casting a Cascade spell. Basically, it either means that Steven's hand is all gas and he's okay with 2-for-1ing himself just to not take an additional 4. But wow, a second outburst from Oliver here.
That is a good one, as we're going to see 2 more Rhinos hit. And importantly, we're going to be doing 8 damage instead of 6 here. So that's going to drop Steven down to 9 life.
Yeah, and Steven's Footfalls is only on 2, so can't get help from the additional Rhinos next turn, which means we're taking 8, going to 9, facing down 3 Rhinos and a Shardless Agent. This is this is going to be a tough one for Steven.
Yeah. See Rhino here.
Maybe Steven has his own copy of Shardless. If Oliver can't maybe answer those, you go block, 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 take 4. But then basically Oliver, for the rest of the game, even if Rhinos somehow trade, Oliver's going to be up a 4/4 in every exchange, which means he's getting an additional 4 points of damage every time an attack is made.
Yeah, how is Dagman even supposed to stabilize from here?
Looks like we did not remove a counter from the Footfalls.
Yeah, it does look like we missed that. That's going to be pretty huge next time. We could have really used those Rhinos.
Now, correct me if I'm wrong on missed triggers. If Steven does remember it at some point during this turn, is it something where, like, is it on the stack, or did you know the ruling with that?
I believe that the change is recently the policy updated. If Stikeman had played the land there, I mean, like, oh, trigger on my Footfalls, the judge probably would have allowed it to happen because nothing has changed or whatever. However, I think this would be a moment where it would be a missed trigger and Oliver would get a choice to put on the stack or not. And I'm going to guess that Oliver would be like, nah, I don't want to put on the stack. I'm over 5. You didn't remember your trigger. That's on you. As we are seeing every card of the sun here, as we do see, Mystical Disputes did come in. Force Negation's in. There was a Murktide still. We didn't trim on that. We didn't see any endurances yet, though, from Dykeman. We see Oliver probably checking to see, okay, is there anything like that I need to worry about? Also, this sort of gives you a range on what Dykeman's hand could be. If you see all the Mystical Disputes there, they're not in Dykeman's hand, so.
Yeah, I mean, to be honest with you, that missed counter is probably going to be the difference between winning and losing this game. That counter is so massive here. Just not being able to guarantee to get the 2 Rhinos next turn.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense too, because you trade off everything here. 4/4 gets left over. You drop down to 5, and then suddenly, it's no Rhinos instead of 2 Rhinos for Dykeman.
Yeah. I wonder if Dykeman realized it after the fact, or not sure. But anyways, we're on Oliver's turn here. See if Oliver basically has any follow up here, any sort of like Brazen Borrower, Fire Ice. This game's probably close to. I mean, the game's already close to over, but we'll see what Oliver's follow up here is.
Yeah, and this just shows, right? Like the first game, it took the whole entirety of our match number 1 between Sarah and CJ for them to not even be finished. We still got to see the last 2 turn cycles on camera. But these games can get really complicated with all the creatures on board. You can, use things like ice in order to tap and push extra damage and figure out we want to do that. You figure out if you need to attack with 1 Rhino, 3 Rhinos. It's actually like weirdly complicated when you're not super far ahead. When you are far ahead, like Oliver sort of was here, thanks to that Force Negation on 3, you just get to sort of jam in a lot more situations. As we do see an ice on the Rhino.
Yeah, basically Oliver deciding whether or not he wants to get super aggressive here by tapping down the Rhino. I think he's definitely in a position where he can afford to make an aggressive line like this. Given that Steven doesn't have any great blocks, you kind of just have to trade, go to 1. And, for Steven, just kind of have to pray at this point.
Yeah, and this line's super good from Oliver here because it turns off that Fire Islet and all the future fetch lands. So Dykeman's actually a sort of a stone ring here that can't trip for you, and you're sort of in just the same position if you're Oliver. We do see this Footfalls go down to 1 this turn.
Yeah, I mean that is tough. I mean, imagine if Steven had 2 more Rhinos here. I would maybe see if he has a follow-up Cascade spell.
Yeah, I mean, if Dykeman has like a Brazen Borrower, or he does have a Shardless Agent, okay. Clearly just playing around engineered explosives. He heard about our staggering line, and it's like, that's so smart.
Yeah. Missed the trigger on purpose.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember a friend messaged me once and said, I just got, my opponent cast Violent Outburst in response to my spell, and spell pierced me out of Rhinos. And I was like, that's rough, friend. Sometimes people do crazy stuff. And then apparently later that night, I got the same message again from a different opponent. And my friend was losing it. Anyways, that's to say, you got to be careful in the street. Sometimes people do crazy stuff,
Did you? I don't know if you heard about this this Reddit user. Reddit, by the way, just absolute beautiful website. But there was somebody who was posted on Reddit, said they were, I think, 10-0 in 2 leagues with Rhinos with 4 main deck remand.
Nice.
So the joke is that even if you hit remand, you just remand the Cascade spell and go again next turn.
Yeah, it's just 3 mana draw a card.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. 3 mana draw a card, thin your deck a card. That's like a 2-for-1. Look it up.
It's divination.
Yeah. Yeah. Oliver Dykeman, do y'all need that one if you're gonna beat Sarah? Yeah. I would lose it if that happened to me. Especially the second, because like they're gonna remand once. I'm like, all right, whatever. And then they remand the second time, and I'm like, what are we doing here?
Well, if you ever cast a spell and your opponent just responds with Violent Outburst, and you're like, okay, they're just gonna Rhino me, and then you get remanded out of the game.
Yeah, how are you supposed to play around it? Too? You know, it's either Rhinos or remands.
Yeah.
Holy moly. As we are going to see Oliver here take a little fetch. And now, we mentioned Oliver had this big position, was able to do a thing like ice, push damage. That way Deckman couldn't use the Fire Islet or other lands. But now we have a dominant board presence here from Dykeman, and we have more Crashing Footfall Rhinos coming on the next turn.
Yeah, now, Dykeman is obviously in a dicey position at 1 life, but if maybe he can fade a draw step or 2 from Oliver, we're going to have, 5 Rhinos to Oliver's 2. This might be, there are quite a few lethal draw steps, but if Oliver doesn't find one of those, maybe Dykeman can kind of turn the tides, as it were.
Yeah. Would you see Oliver touching 3 mana? It looks like it might be a Shardless Agent or another Cascader type card. It is going to be Shardless Agent. So we're back to parity on the board here as we do see some Furies and stuff get flipped over.
Sort of parity. Steven's still up a Rhino, right? Because Oliver's going to have 4 to Steven's 5 after the Footfalls assumingly resolves.
That's true, yep.
The other question is, how many Footfalls are left? I think we've both gone through 3 at this point, right?
Yes, that sounds right, because Oliver had 4 Rhinos last turn, and then here's another set of Rhinos. So yeah, that's at least 3. I believe this is the 3rd one from Oliver. I don't think I've seen anything else. And same for Dykeman.
Yeah, and that's something you always got to be cognizant of is, do we actually have Rhinos left in the deck? Because once you've gotten to the stage of nobody has Rhinos left, then it's, whoever draws more Borrowers, Furies, stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. A little bit of a clogged board as Oliver passes the turn. Doesn't want to attack with his Rhinos here. We have 2 new Rhinos coming down for Dykeman. So Dykeman is going to be up 1 Rhino. That's going to make it so a card like Brazen Borrower isn't lethal via a bounce. I guess actually that's not true because you can just block the one that gets blocked. Yeah. Oof. See, the Rhino's matchup is tricky. This is a high IQ deck for gamers. Despite what memes say.
I mean, it does. This mirror gets a little weird. I mean, we look at the board state. There's 9 Rhinos in play. There's a lot of kind of jockeying. Can I attack? And I mean, honestly, at this point, Oliver, I think, is in such a massive position, even though Dykeman has an extra Rhino, because of the life total discrepancy. Like Steven's at 1, he can't really ever afford to attack with anything because Oliver can just say, okay, just take it and then untap and have way more than lethal. So Steven kind of has to play defensively this whole game. And there are plenty of lethal top decks for Oliver at this point.
Yeah. I wonder if Dykeman almost has to start attacking with a singular Rhino just to make something happen, just because there's so many good draws from Dykeman. I'm sorry, there's so many good draws for Oliver against Dykeman here. Yeah,
you probably can't afford to give him infinite time. I like that.
Yeah. I'm curious to see how he chooses to play it. We got a Boseiju as the land for turn. That's going to actually put Dykeman to 4 lands here. There is a Fiery Islet in play, but that Fiery Islet is turned off due to the being only at 1 life. As we see Steven attack for 4. Oliver taking to think about, okay, do I want to go to 11? Do I want to take the trade here? What sort of matters more? And this is sort of where a lot of the skill comes in, especially the random mirror of figuring out, okay, whose favorite am I supposed to be the beatdown? Am I supposed to be more controlling? If we play 3 more turns, am I going to be ahead or not? And it looks like Oliver is going to the tank doing a little bit of math over the next couple of turns. And this sort of separates the good from the great Rhino players.
Yeah, I think, okay, Oliver's going to take a block here.
With all 4 Rhinos.
It makes sense because Brazen Borrower is still going to be lethal. Steven doesn't have enough to put 2 Rhinos on every token. So it's not like something, you're still making something like Borrower a lethal top deck. So it's probably fine. Now, the one thing I will say, if Steven has the 4th Cascade spell here, then we're talking about Steven having 7 versus Oliver's 3, and Steven can afford to get a little bit more aggressive.
Yeah, it looks like there is some 3-mana spell coming down.
Or 6, excuse me. I can't count.
You're all good. But yeah, we like you said though, right? If we have if we have the last Rhino here for Dykeman, we can double block each of those Rhinos, and suddenly Brazen Borrower isn't a card that matters anymore.
Yeah, that's a good point too. We can put the Shardless on the Shardless and then double block every Rhino, so we don't even die to Borrower if we do have Outburst. Now, I wonder if that was kind of a debate from Steven there, kind of tap the 3 mana, maybe to put the Fear of God in Oliver.
Yeah, maybe. It's hard to know too, because it makes sense that if he has a Violent Outburst that he might want to do it now before Oliver attacks. Or I'm sorry, before Oliver untaps, so you can cast Force of Negation. But there's also,
True.
Dykeman has a few cards in hand. It might be a situation where Dykeman might have like Endurance, like you mentioned, right? If Dykeman Endurances himself, he's suddenly way up on Rhino. So Murktide Regent is the draw here from Oliver. That is huge.
Oh, right. Steven did use all 4 because one got forced. I forgot about that. One got forced, and then the other 3 resolved. So Steven is actually out of Rhinos. That's a good point, Chad.
Yeah, that is super smart. Yeah. We're going to have to get an Endurance if Dykeman wants to get more Rhinos going. But right now, we got to worry about this Murktide Regent. As this could see, we mentioned Dykeman has, more Furies in the main deck, has the Fable, a little bit of extra grind. But in these sort of games, the Murktide Regent could sort of say, who cares if you have better card advantage? I am a big flyer. You can't interact with this.
Yeah, Steven's going to need something like a Dead Gone or a Brazen Borrower, and Oliver's graveyard is still pretty flush. He can just go ahead and cast it again pretty easily. Also has 5 mana, so it can just start tapping more lands for the Regent. Notably, does keep up some additional mana here. I think Oliver might be out of cards. Oliver's no cards in hand, right? I think.
Yeah, I believe Oliver is top decking. Dykeman's going to pop the Fiery Island, get a redraw. Dykeman has the Brazen Borrower. That's going to unsummon the Murktide Regent end of turn. Even if it doesn't answer it long term, we have a chump block here and the redeploy, which means Dykeman, who is up on Rhinos currently, might be able to start chip shredding in enough and find a more permanent answer to that Murktide Regent.
That's definitely a good sequence for Steven. Now, have to see if he finds maybe like another bounce spell. Or Fury is probably, if he's able to cast Fury. Obviously can't fetch it at 1 life, but if he, maybe draws a basic mountain, can cast it. But I see, only 1 red source currently. Now, I think his hand is that double Fire Ice.
I think so. So that's going to tap down the Murktide if he wants to do that. He can also get a little cheeky, right? Attack with this Shardless Agent and a single Rhino. Then you still have Rhinos for Rhinos. Oh, sorry, never mind. You can't attack with Shardless and the Rhinos. Oh, you can. Yeah.
Well, actually, yeah, because if the Rhino blocks a Shardless, then you can just fire the Rhino, which is maybe not a bad sequence. Maybe you attack with the Rhino and a Shardless. Say Oliver might block, puts your Rhinos on those 2 creatures. Then you trading a Shardless and a Rhino for 2 Rhinos leaves you with 3 Rhinos versus 1 and a Shardless. That's a really good position with the chump blocker for the Murktide. So Steven might be clawing his way out of this.
Yeah, and even if Oliver doesn't block the Shardless Agent, he maybe sniffs out a Fire Ice here. Someone of Oliver definitely could do that, especially in the mirror match. You're going to be in a pretty good spot because, and it looks like Dykeman might be playing to ice down these Rhinos.
Whoa.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, so Dykeman making an Alpha Strike attack. This is actually so great. If Oliver just blocks with the Shardless Agent, and tries to say, whatever, hit me, then Dykeman has lethal due to trample plus the Fire Ice. And then, if Oliver only blocks a little bit here, the board gets simplified down, and these Fire Ices can maybe go the distance. Looks like Dykeman's actually just going to attack for 8 here, set up a 2-turn lethal that way.
The sketchy part about attacking with 4 is Oliver just blocks 2, right? Takes 8, goes to 7, and then Oliver. Well, I guess in that case you could ice the other Rhino. So, yeah, I don't know. That's really close. Interesting.
It is super close. Yeah. If Dykeman had another red source, it'd be a lot easier too. This is very close here. And also, if you're Oliver, you're trying to figure out, okay, Dykeman has something. He started to tap 3 mana at the end of the last turn. I don't think it was Brazen Borrower. Was it Violent Outburst? How does that matter too? He was willing to attack with everything. Violent Outburst is a pretty easy read that Tomiko could come to. Also, Fire Ice and Dead Gone stuff. Looks like Tomiko is going to take a chance here and fall down to 7. Doesn't think he can win by trading off with the Rhinos.
And I wonder if you're Dykeman, if you want to upkeep tap 2 Rhinos. You probably do, because you can't afford for Oliver to top deck a Force of Negation here. So my guess is we're probably going to see upkeep ice 2 Rhinos.
Yeah, if you upkeep ice 2 Rhinos, you can double block the 1. That's going to beat a card like Brazen Borrower. And then if you tap the 2, you play the Murktide. That's 3 for 3, and that's lethal if you're a Dykeman.
Right.
Unless Oliver draws Brazen Borrower or I guess Fury would stabilize Oliver for a turn.
So you go tap 2, Fury, kill a Rhino. You would have 3 blockers. Tap 2, 1, 2, 3. I think it would 1, 2, 3. I think because you'd kill 1. Okay, yeah, you're right. I gotcha.
Yeah, it's very close. It's also a moment here too of does Dykeman want to do that? How does he want to play around these things? Because if Oliver just draws another Cascader, all of this is for naught. But Dykeman is sort of, we were talking about before, he can't give Oliver infinite time. He might just have to take a chance on love here and start icing down these Rhinos. So we are going to see the first ice for sure. That makes a lot of sense. Dykeman takes the draw step, has the other ice for sure from what we noticed in the hand. And it looks like, he is going to. Oh, it's such a, there we go.
Yeah, we want to fire up the second one. I guess you don't actually mind too much if Force of Negation is top deck, because even if the ice gets forced, you can still just block 3 creatures. So I guess, I don't know. It's close.
Oh, it looks like we're
Petty
Brazen Borrowing. Okay. Yeah, so Dykeman seems to agree that this game is going to come down to that sort of stuff. So,
and we're actually still not dead. We're not dead to Oliver drawing Petty Theft, because you can put 2 Rhinos on Rhino and then Shardless on Shardless. So Petty Theft isn't even a lethal top deck from Oliver now.
Yeah, that is true. Yeah, it looks like Oliver maybe needs to draw something like Shardless Agent of his own here and just get the last copy of Rhino, since Dykeman is out from the Force, but Oliver still has the last copy of Crashing Footfalls in deck. Sort of a sicko match, despite being a Rhino mirror where it's just sort of all on board. This sort of shows just how sweet the Magic game engine is.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people kind of dislike the cascade mechanic, but it does kind of generate these kind of interesting games where there's a lot of attacking and blocking. There's a lot of combat math, trying to figure out, like you said, who's the beatdown, when can I attack, when do I have to play defense? There's a lot of things to think about, even when you're just jamming a bunch of 4/4s against other 4/4s.
Yep. Magic's just a sick game, and now Dykeman's got to decide, am I going to attack all in, lose to the Violent Outburst? Can I even afford to beat Violent Outburst if I could? What's going on? Gets a draw step and has Fable the Mirror Breaker in hand.
You know about the second ice, too.
Oh, yeah, that's right. So it was still the second ice.
This should be lethal unless Oliver top decks something, because you go ice down Rhino, 2 blockers, block there. Or, excuse me, ice down the Murktide. 2 blockers, block there. That's 3 Rhinos coming in. You can also just do this, right? Because I think 3 blockers. Yeah, that's it. There we go.
Yep. Oliver loses there. Did not have a Violent Outburst last card. Congratulations to Steven Dykeman taking down Oliver Tomiko in our semifinals. That is an amazing sort of game there. That was a sweet one to watch. We sort of identified before, Devin, you mentioned, I think Dykeman's favorite in the mirror. I think his deck sort of pre-boarded. Seems to have panned out that way. Doesn't matter if he's pre-boarded, though, because Sarah Shearing is waiting against Dykeman in the finals here with her 3 engineered explosives, teched out Murktide deck for the Rhinos matchup. We're going to be right back. We're going to take a quick break, set up for our finals. We'll be back in just 2 minutes. So go grab some water, and we'll see y'all here in just a second.